Hello everybody. Obviously my name's Tara. My company is actually part of a group called the New Resource Group. So I've been working in partnership with another RTO that's done a lot of this work. So today what I'm going to talk about is share with you some of the insights into that we have learned about over the years of combined experience in terms of working in the field of leadership, organisational development, and design. I'll share with you about how our philosophy supports change, organisational growth, regardless of what stage it's in actually, and we actually call it building brain-friendly organisations. So I do want to preempt this talk, however, because I know there's a few of you in the audience. I'm not a neuroscientist, nor am I an organisational psychologist. My background is I've actually got a Masters in Organisational Design and Development, and have worked actually in the mining sector for a very long time, particularly for the last 8 years. I had 7 years in the Pilbara, working with companies geared around iron ore. I'm now in the CQ working with gas and coal. So I've got a fair amount of experience on what happens, particularly at that front coal face. So over the next half an hour, I'll share with you how we believe that building brain-friendly organisations is changing the way to how a business can build its own capability and effectively embed human capital within an organisation, particularly in the toughest of times. Now, let me see if I can work this. It's beeping at me. There we go. Okay, so what we're saying is, we're starting at the beginning. Basically, neuro leadership is a term that was it's pretty new. It was coined by a guy called David Rock. Anybody ever heard of him? He's written the Your Brain at Work book. He's an Australian author. Well, he's actually a Dr. David Rock now. And there are many organisations worldwide that are moving to this way of thinking. And actually being more of a learning organisation, thinking about its growth from sustainability perspective, and actually thinking about the human capital and putting that on the balance sheet as an asset, and how do we actually value that? A lot of organisations that I've worked with are actually doing it without even realising that they're doing it, particularly in the mining sector, but there are also many organisations in the mining sector that are a long, long way away. And of course we're seeing a lot of these fatigue issues and stress issues coming out from that. So I want to share with you also some of the experiences that we've actually found from working with these organisations and some of the things that they've actually found in changing the way they think about people in the organisation. Rightio. Anybody remember The Scarecrow, The Wizard of Oz? One of my favourite movies. I guess the question is, so why should we care about productivity? Why should you care, about building productivity and innovation? Particularly in the mining sector where some of that is actually a little bit low, other than output. So talk about the carrot and stick. There is great money provided in the mine sector, but people are really tired and they're stressed. The divorce rates are going up in the areas I live in. And in many cases they can be quite unproductive at operational level because their energy levels cannot support that production. Particularly around some of the shift structures that we're seeing, particularly in the gas industry at the moment while they're under construction. And we're finding from that 75% of our workers are actually not engaged. They're actually there and they're physically turning up to work, but they're not actually engaged. We can cite many examples from our clients that we've been working with that they might have all the wonderful safety processes in the world, but actually they're still having major incidences. People are still getting hurt. And so they're saying to us, why is this the case? We have behavioural safety programs, we have great systems, but people are still getting hurt. So when you think about the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, and he has a musical lament. Do anybody remember what he said in that movie? No? Oh, I'll tell you if you can't remember. And my head I'd be scratching while my thoughts are busy hatching. I wish I had a brain. And I guess the point in all of this is that a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about every other organ in their body, but actually often forget to think about their brain. And actually, if they remember to think about their brain, it actually supports our enjoyment of life. And so we actually need to focus on building the health of our brain, just like we worry about building the health of the other organs in our body. And part of that we do with organisations is provide a supporting environment to do that. So let's look at a bit of the science around the brain and unlocking the mystery. Particularly over the last 5 years, neuroscience has actually come along in leaps and bounds. It's accelerated our understanding of how the brain behaves and responds to stimuli in becoming much better understood. And some of that is that we're using things like MRIs and other brain imaging tools. By studying where the areas of the brains light up in response to stimuli and certain experiences, neuroscientists can find the environments that are suitable for peak performance. Neuroscience has proven many connections. For example, you increase dopamine, that increases attention and pleasure, and it produces an increase in serotonin, which reduces fear and worry, and increases oxytocin. It actually makes us more trusting of others and also reduces our stress hormones. So what do you think if you could actually create an environment that teaches us or allows people to increase dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin? It's like having a natural high without really having smoked drugs, basically. So neuroscience is changing the quality of the conversation that we actually have in our businesses right now. It's not revolutionary, rather it's actually something you probably do every day and don't realise you're doing it. But what we're saying is how can you actually understand this process and define that as the way you do things in your business? And also how it drives your business. So there's an awful lot to share about the brain. And for those of you who are interested or have even seen a picture of the brain, I've just put that up there so you can see what different parts of the brain do. I'm not going to go into them, I certainly don't have the time to do so today, but there's some key areas I really want to focus on because they really affect how we actually work in our environment. The primary one is the frontal lobe. It's the pink area in the picture. So this is really the workhorse of our brain. This is where we think, process, innovate new ideas, solve complex problems, and it's also our behavioural control centre. It's also known as your prefrontal cortex, or your PFC is in there. David Rock suggests that you think about your frontal lobe or your PFC like a stage, in a play. So you've got all these actors in the audience, their ideas, things to do, complex problems that you have to solve. Most of us have 3 or 4 actors on the stage at any one time. In reality, what David Rock says is you really should only have 1 because your brain can't cope with any more. The PFC uses 40% of our brain energy. So you think about if you're at work and you're spending every day working through complex problems and you go home exhausted. Well, it's because you've spent most of your day functioning out of your PFC and your brain's tired or brain dead. The temporal lobe, the yellow bit in the middle, is your memory and understanding. And most particularly it forms new memories, language formation, but the temporal lobe also houses the hippocampus, all these lovely big words. And sure, I had to go through a whole course to figure out how to pronounce these, by the way. And it plays a key role in the formation of long-term memory. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it also houses the hippocampus, which is modulated by the amygdala. You keeping up? Really, the core point is this: we call the amygdala the Amy. We call her Amy because she's emotional. You can't see it in this diagram, but if you actually took a cross-section of that yellow part, and it's at the back, we have these little nuts or nodes or almonds, and that's our amygdala. And the amygdala is tiny, but actually can cause great havoc on our lives. It's part of the limbic system. Have anybody ever heard of the term going limbic? No? Okay. I'll explain to you what that means. So basically, it's our prehistoric brain. It hasn't really evolved over the last how many million years, but it's the brain switchboard. It's a part of the brain that causes, obviously, all this pain in our life, but it also causes positive conditioning. It was the part of the brain that tells the motor cortex and the sensory cortex whether to fight or flight when that lion or bear turns up. What's interesting is actually the threats we face today aren't generally physical. In most part, they're an emotional threat, but our brain can't distinguish and has the same response. So your wife starts screaming at you, you go limbic because you think your amygdala thinks it's a threat. And so, you all of a sudden can't concentrate very well because it's just taken over every other part of your brain. Okay, so there's really a lot to share about the brain. And I think I won't go into everything, but I really like the concept of left and right-hand brain thinking. Neuroscience has actually kind of debunked it, quite frankly. So you can't say, with great pride, I'm a right-hand brain thinker. Sure, you can refer it to task usage, okay? But in fact, the right brain is the unconscious mind, so it focuses on emotions. The left brain is the conscious mind, focuses on logic and speech. The left brain is the interpreter. The right brain is the hemisphere that says, well, what's the story that I'm going to use to explain it? So in effect, very close, they work very closely together, and there's actually neurons that run across the top. So really, what we're aiming to do is trying to teach people how to be whole brain thinkers. And Einstein was actually was a man before his time. He was definitely a whole brain thinker. He could actually do left and right brain thinking tasks. He was a brilliant mathematician and a fantastic artist. Where his real skill and power came was the fact to use all of that together. And that's what we really need to be thinking about. Has anybody heard of Daniel Pink at all? Yeah? He's done some work around the future is the age of conceptual thinkers. So in the 80s, we were very process-orientated thinkers with the industrial age. The dot-com boom was very much conceptual. It's very much right-hand thinking, creative thinking. Well, basically the future is we need to be engaging and employing whole brain thinkers or conceptual thinkers. So it's not just people that have got great technical skills. So we believe that current business practices are actually at odds with what the science is telling us. So I'll step away from the individual for now and sort of see how this kind of stuff fits within an organisation and how we can use it to support us in the challenge of difficult times, like what we've been saying about in the mining sector. So when things get tough, high stress or crisis, commodity prices go down, managers and leaders actually expend larger amounts of energy that can lower engagement levels. This can lead them to falling back, particularly on hardwired thinking, and focusing more on process rather than people, because it's easier to do. Being in the survival mode themselves, which focuses more on self-preservation than others. I've seen that many times within an organisation. Getting caught down in the detail, so to satisfy themselves so they won't get caught out. So, bum protecting, basically. So when they're going limbic, this is what we're seeing they're starting to do. And it reduces the overall quality of the management and leadership within an organisation. And a downward spiral generally affects all the staff. So using tools grounded in research and how your brain works, we look at how we can actually fix this problem or support this problem. And the main thing to think about is the environment that we function in. So does anybody think that we're actually working longer hours? Yes? Yeah, you're right. We'll get to that. So actually, in reality, the surveys have actually shown we're actually working less hours, funnily enough, per week in terms of full-time employed hours. It was lower across the 2000s. It's 40 hours a week as compared to the 90s, which was 41 hours a week. Now, it's only 1 hour, but when you're thinking about a whole research demographic, but you're exactly right. Energy, and basically the reason why we're actually working more is we're actually putting more energy. We're always thinking about work, 24 hours. So what we're saying is actually the solution to all of this is actually supporting the development of energy within an organisation and people's energy. So you think about a battery cell. When it's at critical level, there's not much more that battery can do. It needs to stop, it needs to recharge. It fits into some of this health and wellbeing stuff that's been spoken about today. So we sort of have a couple of big ideas about what can be done and why a lot of these things are happening. So one of the main ones is we think that the workplace is increasingly hyperkinetic. Does anybody know what that means? No, that's all right, because I'll get to that in a minute. But it's pretty much being on 24 hours. The other one is that fatigue changes the brain. When you run out of energy, when you're buggered, you're probably not listening to me now because you might be tired. Because your lunch is kicking in now and you might want to have a little sleep. And attention is a limited resource. It's not actually, a great big pit that we can keep drawing from. It's a very limited resource. And fatigue and stress reduces all of these things, and it's a really common factor in the mining sector. Fatigue and stress actually changes the brain, but there's many things we can actually do to support that process. Okay, and so as my learned colleague over here already suggested, that we're actually working 24 hours because we're permanently plugged in. And this is really what hyperkinetic is referring to. George Hallowell coined that term, and he was looking at something called attention deficit because we've used too much, there's nothing left. Some of the common symptoms of hyperkinetic environments, and we see this every day with either yourself or the people you work in, constant interruptions, guilt and panic because you're just not getting to what you need to do, feeling stressed, always on, can't maintain focus, difficulty remembering things. I don't know about you, but one of my little problems in life is I still find myself waking up in the middle of the night and going to the loo and taking my iPad with me, just to check whether there's an email that I need to deal with before the morning. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that does that, because we are 24 hours connected. I went to coffee around the corner here. There were 40 people waiting, must be great coffee, little hole in the wall, not a sound. Everyone's sitting there with their face in their smartphones. No one talking. 40 people, 7 o'clock on a Thursday morning. That is hyper-connected. How do we ever turn off from that? Okay, and what happens from that? We get tired. Our brain can't cope. We're always processing information. And not just us, so is everybody else around us. And what we need to do is find time to switch off. Reduce that fatigue, get our energy levels back up again, and then therefore re-engage in the workplace. And this is where we're finding we can support businesses in terms of helping to build that energy and therefore engagement within the workforce. So I've touched on energy already, but we believe this is actually the key in employment engagement, employee retention and increased performance. How you choose to manage your energy really depends on how you manage your brain. Brain's actually elastic. You can change what it's done before. You can change a neural pathway, you just need to focus. Energy, how much or little, very much affects our performance in any environment. We must be able to have those opportunities to renew. I mean, take Google. Everybody's ever seen any documentaries on any of the IT companies. They've got pods that you can go and switch off for 5 minutes. You can play table tennis to boost your energy levels. They have a whole range of formats to actually do that. They allow you to work at any time of the day that suits your circadian rhythms. Nighttime, daytime, whatever suits. Human beings go through the process of renewing and expanding energy. And it's critical that we as organisations provide the opportunity for them to renew that and not just keep working and wearing themselves down. And it's pointless actually putting an engagement process in an organisation or an organisational change in the organisation if people don't have the energy in the first place. They're not going to engage into another change process because they're fatigued. So we have a little process that we actually use to try and explain this, which we call the 3 E's, about that engagement of energy, effort. Well, you build energy, that will actually put more effort in and people will be much more engaged. Okay, so, let's take a person that's just started work. They have high levels of energy, effort and engagement. But over time, that will disappear. If, however, they've got, you as a business has great systems, great processes, transparent business performance, engaged management, competency, training, development, enabling systems, well, their energy engagement might actually stay up there, at least halfway. And they say, it's okay to work here. It's okay. But what happens if you had an organisation that really, like Atlassian or Google, that really focused on culture and behaviour from the top end? Meaningful and purposeful actions and aligned goals, trusted leaders, a voice to talk. We are a social beast. Having opportunities to do that and innovate and talk and discuss, you're more likely to get someone say, I actually really love working there, because they've got high energy, high effort, and therefore highly engaged in that organisation. From this, you get self-empowered teams. I mean, there's many examples of manufacturing companies in Europe that survived the GFC that were really quite a flattened structure. Now, that's the problem with a lot of our mining companies, is they're very not flattened and often quite silo. So it doesn't engage collaboration. In some of these examples in Europe, some of these manufacturing companies, they actually survived some serious downfalls in the area they were manufacturing because of the fact that they had a fast, neat, innovative team that could make decisions quickly, have discussions about things quickly and communicate that back to the board quickly. Obviously, you can't just go, all of a sudden that process is flat. You now have a self-empowered team. You need to create a process around how they function together. Okay, so one of the tools for actually building energy is this new concept that we've come up with called attentional intelligence. Anybody obviously heard of emotional intelligence? Daniel Goleman, obviously IQ and all that sort of thing. Very important stuff in leadership and development training. Well, we actually believe there's another intelligence, which is attentional intelligence. And we think it's actually the key to organisational transformation in an age where distraction is basically what working day life is about. So, more big words. But I'll get to that in a sec, actually. But research shows us that we're actually interrupted every 5 minutes. Now, that could be just internal interruptions. I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm to the loo. Could be anything, as well as other interruptions. So we think there are some 3 key components of attentional intelligence to actually support your attention. And the first is meta-sensing. So actually noticing what you're feeling. What are you feeling right at this moment? What's my brain noticing? What's going on for me at this point? The second is metacognition. So this is noticing what I'm thinking, but not the usual way. It's actually like an impartial spectator, someone sitting over the top of you, looking down at yourself. That's what basically metacognition is. It's looking at what you're actually thinking about. What are you seeing? What are you thinking? And the other one is metafocus. So noticing where your attention is actually directed. Is it on the pen that you're drawing? Is it the fact that you're thirsty and you need to have a drink? But actually being consciously noticing where your attention is focused. And we actually think that whilst we talk about emotional regulation and emotional intelligence, it's the same thing with attentional regulation. It's actually being consciously focusing on your attention and how you regulate that, and even allowing it to switch off, but knowing that you're going to come back to that focus on whatever task you're doing. Okay? People may have heard about mindfulness. It's actually really grabbing some legs in a lot of organisations at the moment. Yoga, all sorts of things like that. Well, actually, there's a lot of organisations that are engaging the concept of mindfulness, and it simply could be just switching off for a second, not thinking about anything, and then going back to your task. Because what you're doing is you're giving your prefrontal cortex a little break, so it can go, oh, okay, I can put the energy somewhere else, and then I'll come back to that part. Okay? Now, I want to share a little thing about attention and the concept of multitasking. Who thinks that they can multitask? No hands. Well, I've never had that before, particularly the women, because we can multitask, can't we? Yeah. Basically, what we've learnt from neuroscience is you actually can't multitask. You task switch rapidly. And depending on the complexity of the task, depends on how fast you're task switching and also how well you're actually doing each task as you switch. So I use the example. I actually was, doing what I always do. The kids were doing the homework, cooking dinner, on the phone to my mother. All things that really don't take a lot of concentration for me because I do it every day. All of a sudden, my mother said, I've got breast cancer. So that whole process has gone to my prefrontal cortex. It takes a lot of energy to think about that. And I burnt the dinner. So I wasn't multitasking. I was task switching really fast because they were tasks that I knew and was comfortable with. But when that task all of a sudden required a whole lot of effort of concentration, I did one of the tasks really badly that I've done every day. So that's a perfect example how multitasking is a myth. And guys, you're not allowed to go home and use that in an argument with your wives. You're not allowed to do that. It's not fair. So the brain's like a muscle, really, that you use, like a physical muscle. You've got to use that brain to improve the way you engage your effort and energy within a workplace. And that's also what you've got to be doing with people within your organisation to help support build that energy. And attentional intelligence is one way of doing that. We know from research that, basically I've already covered that. Right, yeah. So attention regulation is the key. So how do we do this? We look at the process of building attentional regulation, building energy in an organisation, like the brain. The brain functions very much from the inside out. We should be doing that in an organisation. And that could be organisationally, so looking at the middle management out, as opposed to top-down, bottom-up. Okay, it's also looking at the way we actually communicate with people in an organisation. So we look at these 4 key areas. Focus and attention, insightful problem solving, collaboration, engagement, facilitating and managing change. We look at what's happening in the middle of the organisation. What are the processes around that? How is energy managed? One of the things that I find really interesting, and I've had a lot of conversations with a fellow recently who is ex-CEO of banks, in a lot of, particularly in the States, they're actually now putting a value on human capital. So they literally have got a model for putting a value to that and then actually putting it on the balance sheet as an asset, as opposed to a consumable resource or expendable item. Now that's really interesting because what does that do for a business? It builds shareholder value. But the only way you can actually put human capital on a balance sheet is actually know that you have value there, that you're not actually using it like it's, it doesn't matter if it runs out because we can always get more. Well, actually, in fact, we've heard from many talks today that that's not the case. So if we actually can do something really well with the ones we've got and really build their energy, effort and engagement, we actually have some serious human capital that we can actually value and put on our balance sheet. And for your shareholders, that's pretty powerful. Not quite got there in Australia yet, but it's certainly happening overseas. There's a few organisations that are starting to do that, particularly a lot of service-based consulting companies. I think KPMG's had a look at doing some of this sort of stuff. So at the heart of it, we all want to be a hero of our own story. And we believe that neuroscience is actually helping us to create a more meaningful and powerful way of communicating how to build effort, energy and engagement. And while we're not saying go jump off your granddad's roof and be a superhero, what we're saying is maybe we should think about ways in our organisations to provide the space and the freedom to help people actually play and engage and build their energy. Actually find ways to communicate each other, because from that we actually get innovation. And as I said to you, it basically focuses on building that sustainability and building capability within an organisation. So it's all well and good to create a new and lovely engaged environment. However, as I said, you need the fish to have the energy to actually jump across to that new environment. And the research saying that the old conversations we've actually had about how we run our business and how we motivate staff and retain staff is actually not as effective as they once were. So if you want to change the quality of the conversation and recover more energy within your business, which leads to higher effort, engagement and energy, well then we can come outside and have a chat to us. We have a little tool that we use to help have that discussion with you, and it's purely just a conversation around ways that you can actually look at building that within your organisation. So thank you.